Imagine this. You're sitting in a small diner. Just lunch. Nothing fancy. No trouble. Then suddenly, police lights flash outside. 2 officers walk in. They point at you. No explanation. No questions. Just orders. People stare. Phones come out. Whispers fill the room. And within minutes, you're in handcuffs. Now, here's the twist. You're not a criminal. You're not a suspect. You're not even doing anything wrong. You are a black FBI agent. And for the next 7 minutes, everything you believe about authority, assumptions, and justice is about to be tested. Because what started as a routine call will expose a truth so uncomfortable that it shocks the officers, the crowd, and the entire nation. Stay with me. Because this story isn't just about one arrest, it's about what happens when the tables turn, and the system is forced to look at itself. Nobody in that diner noticed him at first, and that's usually how moments that change lives forever begin quietly, almost invisibly, hiding inside what feels like an ordinary day. It was a regular, weekday afternoon, the kind of afternoon people barely remember once it's over. The sky outside was bright but not harsh. Sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the small downtown diner, landing softly on the tiled floor and wooden tables. The place smelled like coffee, grilled meat, and freshly fried potatoes. The lunch crowd had settled in. Forks clinked against plates. Coffee cups were refilled without anyone asking. A waitress laughed at something a customer said. Low conversations blended together into a steady, comfortable hum. This was a place where people came to relax, to take a break from work, to feel normal for 30 minutes before going back to their busy lives. People felt safe here. At a corner table near the middle of the diner sat a black man in his early 40s. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't drawing attention to himself. He wore a well-fitted gray suit, not flashy, not overly expensive, just clean and professional. His shoes were polished. His posture was calm and upright, the posture of someone who carried discipline without showing it off. He ate slowly, deliberately, like a man who wasn't in a rush, but also wasn't wasting time. His name was Daniel Carter. To everyone else in that diner, he was just another customer. But in exactly 7 minutes, the entire diner and later, the entire city would know his name. Daniel had spent the morning in meetings downtown, long meetings, the kind filled with serious conversations, quiet tension, and decisions that most people never realize are being made on their behalf. Daniel wasn't just any office worker. He was a senior FBI field agent, specializing in internal corruption, misuse of authority, and interagency investigations. His job wasn't glamorous. There were no car chases, no dramatic shootouts, no movie-style hero moments. Instead, his work lived in files, interviews, patterns, and quiet truths. He investigated the people who were supposed to protect others. And that kind of job teaches you something very early on. It teaches you how fragile trust really is. That morning, Daniel had wrapped up a tense meeting involving a long-running case. His head still buzzed with details, timelines, and names that couldn't be spoken outside secure rooms. Before heading back to the office, he decided to stop for lunch. Nothing fancy, just food. Just a moment of normal life. He chose the diner because it was close, familiar, and unpretentious. He had been there before. The staff recognized him. Even if they didn't know his name or profession, he ordered grilled chicken, fries, and a glass of iced tea. The same thing he ordered, almost every time. The plate sat in front of him now, steam rising slightly from the food. Daniel cut his chicken neatly, took a bite, and let his shoulders relax just a little. For the first time that day, he wasn't Agent Carter. He was just a man eating lunch. But across the room, someone was watching him. Near the window sat a white man in his late 20s, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans. He had come in with a friend. They were halfway through their meal, talking about something forgettable: sports work, weekend plans. Then the man glanced up. His eyes landed on Daniel. He looked once. Then again. His expression changed, not dramatically, but subtly. His brows pulled together. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer to his friend. "Hey," he whispered, nodding his head slightly toward Daniel. "You see that guy over there?" His friend followed his gaze, glanced at Daniel for a second, then shrugged. "So, I don't know," the man said. "Something about him feels off." The friend frowned. "What do you mean?" The man hesitated, searching for words. "He just doesn't look like he belongs here." The friend looked again. A black man in a suit, eating lunch. "He's just eating," the friend said. "What's the issue?" The man shook his head. "He keeps looking around. He's too quiet." "Why is he dressed like that here?" The friend exhaled, clearly uninterested. "Man, you're overthinking it." But the first man couldn't let it go, because once a thought like that takes hold, once suspicion replaces curiosity, it grows fast. Every Small movement Daniel made now seemed suspicious to him. The way Daniel paused between bites. The way he glanced up when the door opened. The calmness in his expression. To Daniel, these were nothing. To the man watching, they meant everything. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What if he's waiting for someone? The man whispered. Waiting for who? His friend asked. Annoyed now. I don't know. But you hear stories all the time. The friend rolled his eyes. Stories about what? The man didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and in that moment, a single choice quietly tipped the day toward chaos. Instead of asking a question, instead of minding his business, instead of considering that his assumption might be wrong, he opened his phone, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered calmly. 911. What's your emergency? The man lowered his voice. I'm at a diner downtown, he said. There's a guy here who's making me uncomfortable? The dispatcher asked the standard questions. What is he doing, sir? The man hesitated. Well, nothing exactly, but he's acting strange. Strange how? He's just sitting there, the man said, his voice tense. Watching people. He looks nervous. The dispatcher paused. Is he threatening anyone? Is he armed? I don't know, the man replied, but he doesn't look like he belongs here. I just thought someone should check it out. Those words, doesn't look like he belongs, would later echo across news reports, social media, and debates nationwide. The dispatcher thanked him and said officers would be sent to assess the situation. The man ended. The collie felt a strange sense of relief, like he had done something responsible, something helpful. He didn't know. Daniel was federal law enforcement. He didn't know. Daniel carried a badge. He didn't know Daniel had spent years dismantling corruption, protecting whistleblowers, and standing between power and abuse. He didn't know Daniel had dedicated his life to upholding the law. All he saw was a black man in a nice suit. And to him, that felt suspicious. Outside, sirens wailed softly in the distance. Inside, Daniel lifted his glass of iced tea, took a sip, and continued eating, completely unaware that patrol cars were already turning onto the street, unaware that his quiet lunch break was about to become a public spectacle, unaware that in just a few minutes, a single assumption would collide with reality, and nothing would be the same again. The bell above the diner door jing-led once, then again. At first, no one paid attention. The bell rang all day, customers coming and going, waitresses balancing plates, life moving in and out without interruption. But this time felt different. Conversations slowed. A fork stopped midair. Someone near the counter looked up. The waitress paused with a coffee pot in her hand. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside. Their boots hit the floor with a quiet but deliberate weight. One officer was tall and broad-shouldered. His uniform stretched tightly across his chest. His jaw was clenched, his expression hard and unreadable. The other was younger, slimmer, his eyes moving quickly as he scanned the room from left to right, absorbing faces, hands, movements. Their radios crackled softly. Static, murmured codes. The comfortable hum of the diner faded into uneasy silence. People knew this feeling, the sudden awareness that something was wrong. Daniel felt it instantly. Years of federal training sharpened instincts that never truly switched off. Even in moments of calm, his mind noticed shift changes in sound, posture, energy. He lifted his eyes casually and froze. Both officers were staring directly at him, not scanning anymore, not assessing, locked, focused, walking straight toward his table. Daniel's stomach tightened not in fear, but in recognition. He'd been on the other side of this too many times. He knew the body language, the intent. The moment when a situation narrows down to one person, the officer stopped at his table. The taller one stood close to close. The younger officer positioned himself slightly to the side, angled for control. The taller officer spoke first. Sir. Daniel looked up calmly. Yes. Stand up in place. Your hands on the table. The words landed heavy. The entire diner went silent. Forks stopped midair. A glass clinked as someone's hand trembled. A child at another table sensed the tension and grew quiet. Daniel blinked, confused, but calm. Officer, he said evenly, his voice controlled and respectful. Is there a problem? The younger officer's hand drifted closer to his holster, not resting on it, hovering near it. The taller officer didn't answer immediately. He studied Daniel, eyes sharp, searching for something nervousness, resistance, guilt. We received a call, the officer finally said. You fit the description? Daniel slowly placed his fork down. The sound of metal touching the plate echoed louder than it should have. May I ask? Daniel said carefully. What description? The officer ignored the question completely. Stand up, Now, the tone had changed. Not a request anymore, an order. Daniel took a slow breath. He had been trained for moments like this. Trained to de-escalate. Trained to stay composed. When adrenaline rose and eyes were watching, he stood. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound sharp and uncomfortable. Heads turned fully now. Everyone was watching. Some people looked uneasy. Some curious. A few quietly pulled out their phones and began recording. Pretending to check messages while angling their cameras, Daniel kept his hands visible. Open. Palms relaxed. Gentlemen, he said, his voice steady, I believe there's been a mistake. The taller officer stepped behind him. Daniel felt the shift immediately. The loss of personal space. The pressure of authority closing in. Before he could say another word, click, cold. Metal snapped around his right wrist. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the diner. What are you doing? Daniel asked, surprise flashing briefly across his face before discipline pulled it back under control. You're being detained? The officer snapped. For what? Daniel asked. Don't answer. The second cuff snapped, shut around his left wrist. Metal against metal. Final. Someone whispered, oh my God. A woman near the window shook her head slowly, eyes wide. The waitress froze behind the counter. One hand pressed to her mouth. Daniel felt something familiar rise in his chest. Not fear, not anger, but a deep, heavy frustration. A frustration born from repetition, from knowing exactly how this moment would feel before it even happened. He had lived this before. The assumptions, the glances, the way authority escalated without explanation, the way calm questions were met with force instead of answers. His mind moved fast. He assessed the situation instinctively, number of officers, their positions, the crowd, the cameras, the risk of escalation. He knew one thing, for certain, that this was already out of his control. The taller officer gripped his arm firmly, tightening just enough to send a message. Let's go. Daniel turned his head slightly, keeping his voice low and measured. Officer, he said carefully, choosing every word with precision. I am a federal agent. I can explain. The taller officer laughed. A short, sharp laugh filled with disbelief and irritation. Right, he said, and I'm the president. A few people in the diner flinched. The officer tightened his grip again. Save it. The younger officer glanced at his partner. Uncertainty flickering briefly across his face, but he said nothing. Daniel swallowed. In that moment, something became painfully clear. These officers weren't interested in explanations. They weren't curious. They weren't listening. They'd already decided who he was. They've already decided what this situation meant. They've already decided how it would end. The Treaty's badge, his position, his years of service meant nothing right now. Because assumptions had taken the lead. The taller officer began guiding Daniel toward the exit, his hand firm on Daniel's arm. Phones were fully out now. People whispered openly. This doesn't feel right. He didn't do anything. Why are they arresting him? Daniel walked slowly, deliberately, not resisting, not arguing. Every step echoed in his ears. He kept his head high, but inside, his thoughts raced. Not about himself, about how easily this could have gone worse, about how many others didn't have the training to stay calm, didn't have the authority to be believed, didn't have a way out. As they reached the door, the bell jingled again. The same bell, the same sound, but now it rang like a warning. Instead of a welcome, sunlight spilled in from outside, and as Daniel stepped forward in handcuffs, surrounded by staring eyes and whispered judgment, he realized something chilling. This wasn't just about lunch anymore. This was about power. Perception, and how quickly dignity could be stripped away when truth wasn't allowed into the room. And the worst part, this was only the beginning. Daniel was escorted toward the exit. The entire diner was watching. Now there was no pretending anymore. Phones were raised openly. Chairs turned slightly to follow the movement. Whispers spread like wildfire, bouncing from table to table. Did you see that? What did he do? He doesn't look dangerous. Why are they arresting him? Daniel could feel their eyes on his back. He kept walking, measured and steady, the metal cuffs cold against his wrists. The taller officer's grip was firm, almost aggressive, guiding him forward as if afraid Daniel might disappear if he loosened, even slightly. The bell above the door jingled as they reached it. That familiar sound echoed strangely. Hollow. The door opened. Sunlight hit Daniel's face. For a brief moment, the warmth of the outside world clashed violently with the cold reality of what was happening. Cars passed by. Pedestrians slowed, curiosity pulling them closer as they noticed a black man in a suit being led out in handcuffs. Police radios buzzed. Static crackled. The younger officer raised his mic. Dispatch, he said, his voice tense. Suspect detained. The Word suspect hung in the air. Daniel stopped walking. The taller officer yanked his arm. Keep moving. Daniel didn't resist, but he didn't move either. Officer, Daniel said firmly, his voice calm but unmistakably authoritative. I'm requesting a supervisor immediately. The taller officer turned sharply. You don't make requests, he snapped. He shoved Daniel forward again. That shove changed something. Not in Daniel's posture, but in the energy of the scene. A few people gasped. Someone shouted, "Hey, he's not resisting." A car slowed down across the street. A phone camera zoomed in. Daniel stumbled slightly but caught himself. He straightened, squared his shoulders, and took a slow, controlled breath. This was the moment. The moment where escalation could turn dangerous. The moment where words mattered. Daniel spoke again, carefully. "Officer," he said, louder this time, ensuring witnesses could hear. "Please check my wallet." The taller officer scoffed.
What for?
"Left in her pocket," Daniel said. "FBI credentials." The words landed hard. The officers froze. Not fully, but enough. The younger officer's eyes flicked to Daniel's face, then to his partner, then back again. The taller officer laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, this again," he said dismissively. "Everybody's something." But something was different now. Daniel's voice hadn't cracked. He wasn't pleading. He wasn't angry. He wasn't bluffing. He was calm in a way that couldn't be faked. The younger officer swallowed. "Maybe we should check," he muttered, uncertainty creeping into his tone. The taller officer exhaled sharply, irritated. For what? To waste time? But the cameras were rolling now. The crowd was growing. People were openly watching. "Just check," the younger officer said again, quieter but firmer. "If he's lying, we lose nothing." The taller officer hesitated, then sighed. "Fine," he said. Just to shut him up, he reached into Daniel's jacket. The movement was rough, careless, still dismissive. His fingers brushed fabric, then leather. He pulled out a badge. Folder. Folder, not new, not flashy. He flipped it open, and everything changed. The officer's face strained of color. His jaw tightened. The smirk disappeared instantly. The younger officer leaned closer, curiosity turning to alarm. Then he saw it, and froze. The badge was real. Undeniably real. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Senior Field Agent. Daniel Carter. For a moment, no one spoke. Not the officers, not the crowd, not even the radios. Silence swallowed the sidewalk. The taller, slat officer's hand trembled slightly. The younger Espanol's eyes widened. The reality crashed down on them all at once. They had indeed a suspect. They hadn't arrested a criminal. They had just handcuffed a federal agent based entirely on an anonymous phone call and a gut feeling. The radio crackled again. The taller officer cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of himself. Dispatch? He said. Double quotes, yes. Unit 14. We may have a situation. The dispatcher paused. Define situation. The officer glanced at the badge again, then at Daniel. Possible misidentification, he said. Daniel spoke calmly, his voice steady despite everything. 7 minutes ago, he said, you treated me like a criminal based on a phone call and an assumption. The words cut deeper than shouting ever could. A supervisor's vehicle pulled up moments later, lights flashing, door opening fast. A middle-aged officer stepped out, his expression serious as he approached. What's going on? The supervisor asked. The taller officer held up the badge with both hands, like it might burn him, sir. He's FBI. The supervisor took the badge, looked at it, looked at Daniel then closed his eyes briefly when he opened them again. His face had changed completely. Professional, controlled, concerned. The supervisor immediately stepped closer to Daniel. Agent Carter, he said, his voice tight. I sincerely apologize. He nodded sharply to the officers. Remove the cuffs. Now. The metal clicked open. The sound felt louder than before. Daniel flexed his wrists slowly, rubbing the red marks left behind. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his tie, reclaimed his posture. Inside the diner, people pressed against the windows, disbelief written across their faces. Some mouths hung open. Some phones shook slightly in stunned hands. A woman whispered, I can't believe that just happened. The supervisor continued apologizing, his words careful and rehearsed but genuine. Fear sat beneath them. We'll address this immediately, he said. This should never have happened. Daniel nodded once, but his expression remained serious. Because this wasn't over, not even close. He looked around at the officers, the crowd, the cameras. This isn't just about me, Daniel said calmly, and that's what concerns me. The supervisor hesitated. What do you mean? Daniel gestured toward the diner. Everyone in there saw what happened, and I had credentials. I had authority. I had protection. He paused. What about the People who don't. The question hung heavy in the air. No one answered. Daniel continued, his voice firm but controlled. You didn't ask questions. You didn't explain. You escalated immediately. The taller officer stared at the ground. The younger officer looked sick. Daniel met the supervisor's eyes. This moment, Daniel said, is bigger than me. And you know it. The supervisor nodded slowly. Yes, he said. I do. And in that moment, a quiet sidewalk outside a diner, 7 minutes rewrote the direction of an entire department. Not because of anger, not because of force, but because the truth had finally been seen. And once it was seen, it could no longer be ignored. Daniel didn't leave. That alone surprised everyone. Most people would have walked away the moment the handcuffs came off. Most people would have taken the apology, shaken their heads, and disappeared before the situation could get any heavier. But Daniel stayed. He stood on the sidewalk outside the diner. Sunlight still warming the pavement beneath his feet. Cameras pointed in his direction. Whispers floating through the air. And then he reached into his pocket. Not for his badge, not for his phone, camera, but for his phone. He made one call, a quiet one. No raised voice. No panic, no anger, just calm. He turned slightly away from the crowd as the line connected. Yes, he said softly. It's Daniel. I need you here. He listened, then nodded once. I'll wait. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The officers watched him closely now. Very differently than before. Their posture had changed. Their confidence was gone. Where authority once stood tall, uncertainty had taken its place. They didn't know who Daniel had called, but they knew it mattered. Minutes passed. The crowd grew. People stepped out of the diner. Phones raised openly. Now, cars slowed. Some stopped entirely. Social media live streams began broadcasting the scene beyond the sidewalk. Beyond the city. The unmarked vehicles turned the corner. Black sedans, windows tinted. They didn't rush. They didn't use sirens. They pulled up smoothly, deliberately, and parked along the curb. Doors opened. Men and women stepped out. They wore suits. Simple. Professional. No uniforms. But when they opened their jackets back, official, undeniable, the energy on the street shifted instantly. The police officers who had arrested Daniel now stood stiff, silent, there. Radios stayed quiet. No jokes, no commands, just tension. One of the suited agents approached. Daniel first. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. They nodded. Double quotes, Agent Carter. Thank you for coming, Daniel replied. Then he turned back to the officers. His voice remained calm, but he carried. Officers, Daniel said, do you know why I was in this neighborhood today? No one answered. The taller officer stared straight ahead. Jaw tight. The younger officer swallowed hard. Daniel continued. I was assigned to investigate multiple reports of unlawful stops. He said, racial profiling and misconduct involving civilian complaints. A ripple moved through the crowd. Phones zoomed in. The taller officer's face went pale. Daniel nodded slightly. And now, he added, I have first-hand experience. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They landed with precision. The police supervisor stepped forward quickly, sensing the situation slipping further out of control. Agent Carter, he said, forcing a polite tone, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Daniel turned toward him. No, he said. One word. Firm. Final. This discussion happens transparently. The supervisor hesitated. The suited agents behind Daniel didn't move. The diner crowd pressed closer. The windows, faces, inches from the glass. People held their breath. Daniel gestured gently toward the officers. This didn't happen in private, he said. So the response won't be either. He took a slow breath. Then he spoke not as an accuser, but as a professional. This situation escalated because of an assumption, Daniel said. An assumption made, without evidence, without questions, without explanation. He looked at the taller officer. You never asked who I was. Then the younger one. You never told me why I was being detained. He swept his gaze across the crowd, and that breakdown of communication combined with unchecked authorities, how trust gets destroyed. The officers said nothing. They couldn't. Every movement was being recorded. Daniel continued, his voice steady and deliberate. When authority acts without accountability, it stops protecting people. He said, it starts controlling them. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some nodded. Some whispered. Some wiped their eyes. The supervisor tried again. We understand your concern. This isn't about concern. Daniel interrupted calmly. It's about pattern. That word landed heavy. Pattern. Daniel turned slightly toward the suited agents. Proceed, he said. One of the agents stepped forward and spoke clearly. Effective immediately, she announced. The officers involved are placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The taller officer closed his eyes briefly. The younger officer looked down, shoulders slumping. Another agent spoke. An internal review has been initiated, he said. Body camera footage, dispatch records, and civilian reports will be examined. The supervisor's face tightened. Daniel nodded. And the original caller, he asked. The agent replied, identified and being questioned. Phones exploded with movement. Comments flooded, live streams, within minutes. Clips were being shared across platforms. Headlines began forming in real time. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't raise his fist. He didn't look triumphant. Because this wasn't a win. It was confirmation. Confirmation of what he had spent years investigating. Confirmation of what countless people had already experienced. Confirmation that systems don't break loudly, they fail quietly. Until someone kept it on camera. SD agents coordinated. Reporters began arriving. Microphones appeared. Questions shouted. Agent Carter, how does this make you feel? Do you believe this was racially motivated? Should the officers be fired? Daniel raised a hand gently. I won't be answering questions right now, he said. Then he looked around. At some point today, he added, this will turn into a headline. Almost on cue. A reporter glanced at their phone. It already has, they said quietly. The headline read, Black FBI agent wrongfully arrested during lunch. Daniel closed his eyes. Briefly, not in relief, in reflection, because headlines fade. But the impact doesn't. He thought about how differently this could have ended. How quickly things escalate when authority meets assumption. How many people don't get apologies, don't get supervisors, don't get unmarked vehicles pulling up to set things right. For Daniel, this moment wasn't a victory. It was a mirror, a clear reflection of a system that needed to look at itself honestly. He turned back toward the diner. People inside watched him with awe, guilt, and something else. Understanding. Daniel met their eyes. And without saying another word, he nodded once. Not in pride, but in resolve. Because change doesn't start with anger. It starts with truth. And once truth is seen, it cannot be Later, Daniel stood at a press conference. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded forward. A reporter asked, Agent Carter, do you want the officers fired? Daniel paused, then shook his head. No, he said. The room went quiet. I want change. I want training. I want accountability. And I want people to understand that this doesn't end with me. He explained that countless innocent people didn't have badges in their pockets. They didn't have supervisors to call. They didn't have cameras watching. And that, he said, is the real problem. The police department revised its procedures. Mandatory bias training was implemented. The diner owner issued a public apology. And Daniel, he went back to work. Quietly, because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear suits. And sometimes they get handcuffed for eating lunch. One assumption, 7 minutes. And a truth that shocked everyone watching. If this story moved you, share it because awareness is the first step toward change.